More than a decade ago, the meat packers and USDA partnered up to facilitate more imports of beef and cattle into this country through the relaxation of our U.S. import standards. The first steps in this process occurred in the late 90s and early in this decade. Foreign packing plants were no longer required to meet food safety standards identical to those here in the U.S., and monthly inspections of foreign meat plants were eliminated. Since then, foreign plants have only had to meet a standard of equivalency, meaning their safety standards no longer need to be equal to U.S. standards, and inspections are now only performed periodically. During this same time frame, USDA changed its regulations to allow so-called regionalization, a process that would allow imports from certain regions within a foreign country, even if the country itself is experiencing a disease epidemic. If you are a beef packer or processor, these changes are great. They provide easier access to more and cheaper imported beef. But you're not a beef packer or processor, and what these changes mean to you is that USDA has significantly increased our risk of importing unsafe beef. This threatens our reputation of producing the best beef in the world under the best of conditions. And these changes mean that beef supplies will increase substantially, resulting in lower domestic cattle prices. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't enough to relax import restrictions just on meat, as packers also wanted increased access to cheaper imported cattle. In 2003, when Canada detected BSE in its native herd, U.S. import standards required the border to be closed to Canadian cattle and beef. So what did USDA do when the packers said they wanted Canadian cattle and beef regardless of Canada's BSE problem? Did USDA even require Canada to demonstrate it had its disease problem under control? No. What USDA did was lower our import standards to accommodate Canadian imports while Canada's disease problem continued to grow worse. This is where R-CALF USA took its stand to prevent the further deterioration of import standards that protect the health and safety of U.S. cattle and U.S. beef consumers, as well as the reputation of the U.S. cattle industry. Remember that immediately after the closure of the Canadian border, USDA and even the President publicly stated their intent to reopen the Canadian border as soon as possible. NCBA, the American Meat Institute, and the National Meat Association sent a joint letter to USDA calling for the resumption of Canadian trade by July of 2003, less than 3 months after the border was closed. But R-CALF fought back and won a court-ordered injunction in early 2004 that blocked USDA's efforts to allow Canadian cattle, ground beef, and bone-in beef. In 2005, we filed a second lawsuit and won a second injunction, this time blocking the importation of under 30-month Canadian cattle and beef. Months later, this second injunction was lifted by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals after the meat packers and NCBA joined with USDA to oppose R-CALF's legal action. But R-CALF wouldn't back down, and in 2007, when USDA proposed its rule to allow over 30-month cattle and beef into the U.S., R-CALF filed its third lawsuit, this time along with 5 national consumer groups, and we won our third injunction in mid-2008. As a result of this third injunction, the court ordered USDA to reopen the over 30-month rule and to amend the rule if the public comments submitted during the rulemaking demonstrate that revisions are necessary. R-CALF submitted 27 pages of written comments and 24 exhibits that demonstrate the importance of withdrawing the entire over 30-month rule. R-CALF earned its global reputation of aggressively protecting both U.S. cattle producers and U.S. consumers during the first 4 years of this unprecedented fight. R-CALF has attracted the attention and gained the respect of Congress, the administration, and the national media for being an organization that would effectively fight without hesitation for what its members stand for, despite the incredible odds. As a U.S. cattle producer, you enjoyed perhaps the best cattle prices in the history of your industry during this 4-year period that R-CALF was protecting the U.S. cattle industry through its court-ordered actions. But this is only the beginning. The issue behind our legal action is the fundamental question of whether the U.S. cattle industry will maintain its right to protect its cattle herd from the introduction of any foreign animal disease. While R-CALF fights to protect against the introduction of BSE, we also fight to protect our herd from tuberculosis and Mexican fever ticks, which are both continually reintroduced into the U.S. because of our relaxed import standards along the Mexican border. And we fight to prevent the introduction of foot and mouth disease from Argentina and England, countries that USDA wanted to trade with before the disease was fully eradicated within their respective borders. Your membership in R-CALF USA will help us reestablish the health and safety import standards needed to protect our herd from the introduction of foreign animal diseases.